Hi everybody, welcome to another preview by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. Today we're excited to be previewing this prototype of Pampero by Julian Pombo and APE Games.
So Pampero refers to, actually, is the name of the wind current that goes through South America, particularly over the Pambas or the plains. And that takes part of, I believe it's sort of part of Argentina, but all of Uruguay, which is the map that we're going to be building things on. So in this game, we are private investors helping Uruguay to create a sustainable energy network by building wind farms to harness this strong Pampero wind that is coming through. This is going to help in a couple of ways. One, because it means that we're no longer going to be relying on fossil fuels. Two, if we build a network strong enough and big enough, we're actually going to be able to export energy to our neighbors Argentina and Brazil, which means that we're also going to be able to grow the economy, generate some employment, and so ultimately the winner is going to be the private investor or the player who manages to optimize that the best, which will be measured in leftover money by the end of the game.
Now, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how the game works, but before I get started, please bear in mind this is all in prototype form, so the components and the rule set are subject to change, and please check out the official rulebook and the campaign once it launches. But in Pampero, essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to build out your electricity network. And the way you're going to get things done is you're going to be using a bulldozer meeple or a series of bulldozer meeples to move around these different regions of Uruguay. And in these different regions, you can see that there are essentially worker placement spots where you can place your bulldozer to be facing a type of building that you can put there. There are two types of buildings or types of infrastructure that you're going to be trying to build. The first is the electrical towers. The electrical towers are going to come from your player board. You start with one, but they're going to come from your player board. And what they enable you to do is connect your network of electricity that you're generating in order to get it to the different regions with their contracts. So there are different types of industry that are laid out in contract form across the board, but in order to fulfill them, there needs to be a tower in the region. It could be your opponent's tower or your own tower, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. But the first thing you want to try and build is electrical towers. The next thing that you're going to need to build throughout the game is depicted on these other worker placement spots that show a wind farm. A wind farm, you have a finite collection of them on your player board. They are going to help you generate the electricity, just like in real life. The wind farm is going to be the thing or the engine generating the electricity, which is then feeding it through to your network of electrical towers. When you build these wind farms, you're going to be tracking the energy that they generate at the bottom part of your player board, which is showing how much energy you have available to spend. And when you have enough energy to spend, the two main ways that you're going to be spending that energy is firstly to complete the contracts that are laid out around the board. They're going to help you increase your income tracks that are going to generate you money throughout the game, which you need to continue building things. The other thing you can do with energy is at the end of every round, depending on how much energy you have left over and the number of towers that you're built, if you're creating excess energy, you're going to be able to store it in the form of batteries. And we can then export these batteries to our neighboring countries using these contract cards to send batteries overseas, which again is going to be a source of income to allow you to self-sustain your engine of building your network even bigger. The way that you're going to build all of these things and build out your network is through this use of your action planning mat. Your action planning mat sits in front of you, and at the beginning of the game, everybody starts with the same deck of action cards. These cards have different actions depicted on them, like the ability to build a wind farm or an electrical tower or complete a contract, as well as a range of other things. And you're going to be playing them in an order that you choose on this action planning board. The action planning board is a little bit complex, but to talk about it briefly, you have to build from left to right, but you can use the top track to place a card, or the bottom track. But either way, you always have to take the leftmost spot. The amount that you pay to take the action depends on the region in which you're building in and the position of the card. As the game goes on and you build out the cards across your action planning mat, the actions are going to become cheaper and cheaper. However, at some point you're going to need to take a retrieve action to bring all the cards back into your hand, which gives you your actions back again, but then it's going to mean that every action is going to be more expensive again. So that is a key tension of the game, is active hand management to plan out your different actions and to also think about how you're going to pay for that along the way. Along the way, you'll also be able to draft new action cards into your hand to make your deck of cards a little bit more unique than other players. You'll be able to collect endgame scoring conditions. You'll also be able to, when you build electrical towers, choose from a range of bonuses depending on where you're building those towers that can give you game-breaking abilities or one-off bonuses that are going to help sustain your engine. And the final thing I want to talk about is on this PG&I board, which is your other player board here, that stands for your power grid and your income board, there is this power grid puzzle. When you are able to fulfill a contract from the board, you're going to be removing one of these transformers and placing the contract in your board, which is going to increase your income. But at the same time, you are going to be forced to fill out this puzzle in a way that can only be built out as you unlock different areas of the board by building these electrical towers. And this puzzle is going to give you bonuses along the way. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on the path that you want to take to generate more bonuses to again help sustain your engine. In this game, money is a key resource and it's going to be tight. And so one thing that you can do is you can also take a loan in this game. The loan amount is going to depend on where you place the action card to gain that loan, but ultimately you need to pay back $30. So at most you're going to be getting $17, and at the end of the game you need to pay back $30. So quite steep interest in Uruguay.
That's how it works.
But that essentially is an overview of the game, and we'll talk about more of the nuance of how it plays as we get into our review.
So the first thing I want to talk about is obviously, very biased, but thematic integration. This game is so incredibly heavily thematically informed. Every aspect of it comes directly, it's directly plugged out of either government papers or, World Bank sort of records of how this whole sustainable energy thing played out, or it continues to play out in Uruguay. And that is often one of my absolute favorite things, when I feel like I can actually learn through a game in a way that also kind of makes sense in terms of as you're, going, yeah, of course. So I'm going to need money to get my bulldozer there, to build a wind farm, to get some energy. And then I'm going to be able to use a tower to put that, across the network, fulfill some contracts which are going to bring in income, and so it all kind of thematically makes sense. I loved how much I learned about how the board itself, the way it's sort of divided. You've got the river there dividing the northern part of Uruguay, which is then the more rural areas, which are the priority in terms of getting energy to those areas, and that's where the game starts. And those tend to be kind of like the more accessible sort of contracts. And then at the bottom, you've got kind of like the kind of central urban area, and then the resort type regions, and then you've got Brazil, the neighbors, Brazil and Argentina, which is where once we've kind of got things going, great, we're going to be able to offload some of the excess energy that way. So it all kind of started to make a lot of sense, even just like as a setting.
Yeah, I love that the sea region does represent the metropolis area. Mm-hmm. And because of that, there's more energy requirements. So it's more expensive to go there and get those contracts. I really enjoyed that about the game as well. I think testament to that is we played this game a lot with my sister, who is an electrical engineer, and it took about 5 seconds to teach her this game because straight away she's like, oh yeah, so I need to do that, this, that, and then that's a transformer. I was like, how did you get that so quickly? But I think that's testament to just how well integrated this game is in terms of theme and mechanics.
Absolutely.
I think the best way to talk about how this game feels to play, is to talk about the different sources of tension in this game. The first thing I'll say is that across the course of this game, and you're playing this game in rounds, it's a bit of an unusual way that the rounds work because when you retrieve your cards, you're pushing the time track forward, and it's not until everybody catches up to each other that a scoring round happens. But at most, you're having 3 turns per round of this game, and a round is kind of demarked by having an income phase at the end. So you're doing these 3 actions and then you're getting more money. And what you find at the start of this game is that in the beginning, everything is about money management. You have so little money at the beginning of the game.
You're like, I really don't want to take a loan, but I'm going to have to.
And quite often you find yourself having to take a loan. But you want to build so much at the start of the game because there are limited worker placement spots, but also in order to fulfill contracts, you need to have the right infrastructure. Otherwise, towards the later part of the game, you're going to end up having to pay your neighbors. And I'll come back to that. But essentially, you are trying to build as much as possible. You need as much money as possible. And so it's this just constant money management. How do I get more money? And then when you get about a third of the way into this game, the game shifts into this interesting hand management element because you're also managing the action cards that you have available to you, but you're expending those, and at the end of each round you're only allowed to retrieve the rightmost card on one of these 2 rows, and so you're only getting 1 back, and you've really got to think about the order that you play them out. And then when you get towards the end of your cards, everything starts becoming cheaper.
It's like, it's so cheap now. I want to do everything, but I don't have the card. Like, all the cards are trapped in there. So I'm having to take an action to retrieve everything, which is, again, you kind of lose that as a turn. But then also, now everything's going to be really expensive again.
I know. And so it's just this painful, like, do I want to be strapped for cash and have all my cards available to me, or do I want to have no cards available to me, but have like the freedom to build it really cheaply? And it's just, that is just a constant tension in this game.
One of the things that I really love is with this board, the tension of how you're playing those cards in this board. The fact that you have to, not only are you selecting, obviously, which action you're going to be taking from your, it feels like a lot, but at the end it always also feels very limited. It's like, I only have, 2 cards that will allow me to build a wind farm, and I only have, a couple of cards that will allow me to build those towers. And once they're locked in, I won't be able to access them again. But the way that this board works, which again can be very intimidating because there's a lot of icons and lines and things like that. But once you kind of get the hang of it, I really enjoy it because you've got depending on the region where you're going to be building. So for example, with this wind farm, if I'm going to be building in region A, then I have to play this somewhere where I'm showing the letter A, referring to that region A, and then on the left it's got your guidance as to the cost, and also if it's going to be generating energy, how much energy. And then one of the things that you're going to see is, yes, if we're an A, we're only going to be generating 1 energy and it costs $8. If we go down to B, now all of a sudden it's $10, but we're generating 2 energy. And look at this, if you flick it over, you slide it over and you're building instead in C, then now it's $17, which is so expensive, but now we're generating 4 energy. So it's just this constant, as you were saying, like that tension between the more money I have, the more opportunity I have, but then how this puzzle plays out. And again, as you're the more you're building, and the fact that when you are able to retrieve a card at the end of each round, you're only really able to get the rightmost card, and all your other cards are getting stuck.
I know, they're locked there. And then if you retrieve them, it becomes more expensive again after all your hard work to try and bring the cost down. But I wanted to talk about actually the tension that comes into the game because of that energy generation. So yes, money is a key resource in this game, but so is energy. And energy is going to be generated every time you build a wind farm, as Maggie suggested. When it's more expensive in these more expensive regions, you're going to be generating more electricity. But it's important to always be generating electricity because in this game, you're going to pay for these contracts using the energy amount that's depicted on the board or on the tile in some cases. So you're going to have to reduce your energy to claim one of these contracts, and you need to claim those contracts in order to move these very important income tracks so that you're generating more money to get things done throughout the game. But the other interesting thing is, as you start to remove these electrical towers, you also unlock the ability to store more energy in batteries. And when you have leftover energy, according to the column that you've unlocked, so here I would have unlocked the ability to store 3 batteries worth of energy, but I've only generated or left over enough energy to fill 2, I would get 2 batteries at the end of the round. So it's always this tension between, throughout the round, do I spend my energy to get contracts, or do I keep it there so I can get batteries, which are going to help me fulfill these international contracts, which can be worth a lot of money in and of themselves. But the tension there is that, yes, they're worth money, they're worth $10, but they also score your income track. So without the contracts, I'm not increasing my income track. And then without the batteries, I'm not able to get these international contracts. So it's just this constant meshing of what do I do first?
Everything is so dependent on everything else. So it's not like you can just, I'll just do this and forget about everything. It's like, no, because a lot of other things are relying on that. You can't just be like, I'm just going to make a lot of money. It's like, you can't make money unless you've done all these other things. And so you're constantly having to, pivot and be very efficient with absolutely everything that you do, which I really, really enjoy with this game.
So if you haven't figured it out already, this game is extremely punishing. It's a fairly heavy game to get into, as you can imagine, just looking at the board. It does feel like a heavy game.
Yes.
But also the puzzle itself is a really quite difficult one to crack. It's hard to piece together why you're doing really well in one game versus not in another. And it takes a few games to get that feeling of, I feel like now I understand how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
And the puzzle, I feel like, is more punishing to me than other players are to me.
I particularly enjoyed that because one of the things that I enjoy the most about games is discovering the puzzle and kind of going, this is how this clicks together. I think for some players, and I think you're probably more like this, you like to be able to from the outset kind of go, that's the puzzle, and now execute. Where I feel like so much of this game was, the rewarding experience for me was in throughout subsequent games going, this is how this interacts with this, and this is the lever that I need to pull in order to do this other thing.
Yeah, the interaction with your opponents is fairly indirect. So the main way that you're going to interact with other players is through having to pay them money. And you have to pay the money if you want to, for example, fulfill a contract in a place where they have a tower and you don't, then you're going to have to pay them the cost of doing that action rather than to the supply. And that is such a painful thing to have to do because money is victory points in this game, but money is also so hard to come by that it allows them to maybe not have to take a loan because they've generated a bit of money from other players.
I'm going to say at the same time, it's one of the things that I found most exciting because it's like, it also, yes, it's painful if you're the one paying for that. But to me, I was like, this opens up a whole world of opportunities, both if I'm the player that's strategically putting a lot of those, well, not just the towers, but also bulldozers, putting them in the places where someone might want to build. And it's like, hey, just subcontract my bulldozers and you can, go away, build your thing and do whatever you want. So there's the opportunity for me as the one setting up that infrastructure for other people. But also the thing that I enjoy about it is I don't have to be the one setting up the infrastructure if all of a sudden I decide that I want to fulfill an international contract in an area, in a B area, and I haven't, gotten around to building a tower there. It's like, that's fine. This is worthwhile for me to I'll pay Amy to use her tower, and away we go. So I actually really enjoy that
type of interaction.
Yeah, that shared economy.
Very positive interaction.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that as I observed Maggie playing this game, she had a lot of joy in the early stages of the game, probably more than I felt. But I think that comes down to whether or not you feel like you enjoy building infrastructure or creating something.
Yes.
Because in this game, you certainly feel that sense of momentum in unlocking things on your board and putting them out and building up that infrastructure. And that is a puzzle in and of itself. It doesn't involve other players, but it's an interesting kind of what do you do first, then second, and the order in which you do things. And there's an important little race element to that too, because there are those different benefits that you can unlock as you're building towers. And some of those are like, they're limited in their supply. And so if you get that before an opponent, then you're going to have this ability throughout the rest of the game that no one else can do. Likewise, you can create some variability in your play by collecting different types of action cards to your opponent, or seeing a really powerful end game scoring, or not end game, but actually there's multiple opportunities you have to score these cards, but seeing one of those and nabbing it before your opponent might shift the way and the order that you do things a little bit. So there's those small elements of interaction, but it certainly doesn't feel like, we talk about these worker placement spots, but it certainly doesn't feel like that's the tension in the game is like, am I going to get there before somebody else? There's only a mild element of that.
And I completely agree with that sense of it feels like it's like you against the puzzle of the game more than it is you against the other player. So it's almost like who is able to crack the puzzle of this particular game the best, and in the best possible way. I love the fact that with your cards, we all have the same starting point. So we all have the same starting deck of cards. We all have a very similar starting position. So with these cards, what I like is that there's no surprises. At all points, I know which are the cards that I'm going to have access to, which is the order that I'm going to play them. And I often found myself almost programming, as other players were going through their turns, programming, okay, I want to make sure that I'll do this first, and then I'll do this first with my 3 actions. And so I felt like even though I wasn't necessarily looking at the board while that was happening, I was still very engaged and kind of ready. Having said that, it's not the kind of game where you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to look at my own thing and not ever care about what anyone else is doing. Because you are looking at, hey, where could I put my bulldozer? If I have a second bulldozer, what's going to be a good place that's going to be good for me? But also, if someone else decides to use it.
Or I don't even need to move my bulldozer because Amy's just moved her bulldozer over there, and I'm just going to take advantage of that and build before she has a chance to there.
So and again, in terms of the surprise elements in the game, I never found myself kind of having really nasty surprises. So like, oh, that was so mean. I can't believe you did that. Because it's like, even if someone takes contracts that you had your eye on, there's so much demand. Like this industry, this economy is ready for all the players that can come in and fulfill these contracts.
And there's some elements of this game that I wouldn't say on rails, but there are things that you need to get done in this game, like unlocking your towers. It's kind of unavoidable because as you unlock them, they give you the ability to store energy and batteries, but also they unlock different types of contracts. So you really do need to get that done. You need to also move your income trackers up as well. But there are a few different avenues that you can explore and ways to get that done. I felt like we were all kind of using slightly different strategies, and the variability that comes in because of those bonuses and the extra cards does allow you to think about a different avenue to explore each game. And I know that that's something that you enjoy.
That is one of my absolute favorite things. So every single game, I feel like I can go, oh, I wonder how this thing will play out or that thing will play out. Also, because these end game scoring conditions or additional coin conditions, they vary. So there's a whole stack of these tiles. And so it means that every game becomes its own little puzzle where we've had games where it's about, you're going to get coins for leftover batteries. And so then you have this tension of going, oh my goodness, I could be using the batteries, but it's actually going to be costing me more or less efficient. Yeah. So these tiles, the fact that these tiles vary, create a very different game core puzzle or dynamic every single time.
I've also enjoyed trying to beat Maggie. I have not been successful. I haven't won a single game of this, but I've enjoyed exploring different avenues of this game. One thing that I wish for this game is that it was a little bit more streamlined in terms of its accessibility and getting into it. And yes, it's a heavy game, and yes, you need to invest time to learn it, but there are a few little edge elements that, I kind of, there's a solar contract component of the game that I kind of I wish it wasn't there, to be honest. It's just like a little side thing.
It feels like it feels more distracting than complementary. And even reading through the thematic reason for it there is like the 3 main sources of sustainable energy, wind, solar, and biomass. And so there's even this choice of going, well, we're going to leave biomass because it's distracting from the wind. I agree with that to the point where it's like, leave solar out.
Leave solar out because
the whole game is about, wind and energy. And
there's so so much that you need to get done.
Absolutely.
There's so much that you need to get done that just feels like, I know it's a different way, a different avenue, but I felt like if we're going for like streamline the strategy, I would lose that. There's some cards that turn over your income trackers. I felt like that was kind of unnecessary, and the turn order element of this game is a little bit unintuitive, so I hope that they do kind of think about maybe a better way of explaining that in the game, because it is a little bit confusing and it just seems so unnecessary for something that's like so less complicated than the rest of the puzzle. So they're still working on this game, still working through the rule book, so I hope that some of that gets a little bit tightened up.
I'll say that I do like the fact that in this game it's not the fastest player who determines the pace of the game, it's actually the slowest player, because it's when the last player reaches the key points that those things, the scoring rounds, will be triggered, and even the end of game will be triggered. So I appreciate that, because I'm one of those, Amy's the type of player that will speed through things, and I'm like, but I didn't get a chance to do the things that I wanted.
And I didn't find myself speeding through this, because when you speed through, you're losing the ability to take actions. And so for me, I actually felt like I was trying to use every action as much as possible in this game, because you get so few of them. But anyway, let's move on to player count. So we played this at 4, 3, and 2. There was no solo mode available at the time that
I believe there is one in development.
This.
I haven't actually had access to the rules yet, and I won't be speaking to that yet.
I think that the benefit of playing at 2 players is Maggie and I got this down to a really fast experience for what looks like quite a huge game, and it is very heavy. We got it down to an hour per game when we're playing, or just under an hour when we were playing the short game. I should say that in the game you will have this little addition, upside down, that goes onto the board to make for a longer game experience. That can be more satisfying in terms of getting your engine up and running, because in the short game it's kind of like, yay, I've done everything and now it's over. So the long game is quite fun, but for us to get it down to a really short amount of compact time, you can play in your lunch break, or you can play quickly after work. 1 hour.
And you
1
essentially
hour,
just get an
players.
extra round with the longer game. So it's not like, it's like the difference between 20 minutes
I know,
to like
but
2 hours.
But how great for such a heavy game to be able to play it in an hour. When you play it with 3 or 4 players, it does explode out to a much longer experience. And there is a little bit of like having to wait for your, having to wait for your turn to come around. It's helpful if you play with people who are more experienced in the game, because, they're planning out their actions further in advance, like any game. But then you're looking at, 2 hours or 2.5 hours. But even then, it's kind of worth the trade-off of having a longer game, because one of the elements that having a higher player count brings is that there's more infrastructure.
Yeah, there's another side to this board that is for the higher player counts, that obviously has a lot more spots in it.
I should say that the 2 players actually been tightened up really well, I thought.
So with that other side, as soon as you have 3 players or more, all of a sudden that the economy of there's a lot more of people using my infrastructure, or me using other people's infrastructure, becomes way more relevant. I find that in the 2-player game it's pretty easy to just completely avoid using each other's stuff, so I don't get that satisfaction of being the supplier of
and there's more turnover in the bonuses and the cards, and so you feel more of the stress of, please don't take that, I need that to perfectly play out the actions that I want to do this round. So it's probably better at a higher player count, but perfectly you get that sense of the
perfectly satisfying
and still really difficult at a 2-player count as well. So who should own this game? I think that if you enjoy a heavy game experience, it's important to recognize that this is a heavy game, and it takes a little bit of explaining, particularly with the action planning to new players who are coming into the game. So you have to think about, how often are you going to get this off your shelf to have an experience like that? But if you are someone that's willing to invest time in a game like this, felt like for me, and I think for you, the layers really started to show themselves the more and more we played it.
Something started to click for me even from the first teach. I was like, ooh, I can see that there's a lot here, and I'm going to dig it.
You enjoyed it from game one.
Yeah. And so then and as I said before, I think for me, so much of the enjoyment of this game was in cracking the what is the puzzle here? What are the levers that I need to pull? Not having a very obvious, oh, okay, if that's what I need to do, then reverse engineer it. I need to get this and this and this, and then I'm done. So that was a big component, but I completely agree that, and also it reveals, the game kind of reveals itself over multiple plays. It's not the kind of game where you can have one game and go, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's like, you kind of have to give it a bit of a chance.
Yeah, and I think that if your preference is for like economic games,
yes,
that's where this game really shines. So yes, there's an element of worker placement, but that is quite subdued. It's really in hand management and managing the economy of what you're doing. And I think that is really interesting. It really comes together well. The core of this game is really smart.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, like, this is very difficult for me to like quantify and articulate well, but for those potentially, I don't know if themers out there or the people that kind of, it's about the vibe of the game, if that makes any sense. This kind of felt very similar to how I felt when I would play things like Brass, Birmingham, or when I would play things like City of the Big Shoulders. And again, not because they're mechanically the same thing or even similar, it's just that whatever part of my brain that this is scratching, whatever itch this is scratching, was very similar to what those games activate. So if you like those games, I would be saying this is something to potentially check out.
We hope that you've enjoyed this preview of Pampero. If you have, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.